Let's see. Can those of you on Zoom hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you. Just want to make sure there's not crazy feedback going on. Okay, let's see. We gotta do. Okay. Okay, this should work. Minimum. No.
Gotta make it up here too, right?
I have to unmute this mic. Turn this on. Why are you muting the mic? Those of you guys on Zoom, can you still hear it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, no weird echoes. That's excellent news.
And we got slides going too.
Okay,
So what you do?
let me do. Nope. Yes, I can. No, I'm sorry, Jude. It's like, I don't want to move and then I want to move too fast.
People are settled into their schedules with students registering. Yeah.
And hopefully I don't have anything in my slides that is blocked by the projector.
You know, I wondered why they put that there and not parallel to, they did it in every classroom, they rewired everything.
Well, it's more like.
Let me zoom in a little more.
It's routine every quarter.
Are you gonna do any board work?
It's not the same students, but we just acknowledge that that's a part of the process of getting a financial aid awarded and having to stay.
Yeah.
Process, like
Just stay between the board.
your email over there.
Okay. And then,
Yeah, we got the email.
unfortunately, this is gonna go away.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Those little things that slow down the process.
That's showing up.
All able to release
You,
it.
I'm guessing you're
verify.
Sure. I mean, you could move that there, but maybe not.
The question is, do you move it to page?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
you do.
They want to be
Move this out of the way.
And we put tissues in your backpack in case you need.
I'm
got
now
anything
gonna
you
try to log in on Zoom.
They're
Thank you.
funding doesn't determine the funding you qualify for, so it should be something I believe off the way. Where you do this.
Could you help me come up something here? I'm not gonna be attending on the same paper. Because I need your permission.
Oh, that's me.
Okay. Now, do I put the mic number here?
That's me. I'll take care of that.
Oh, she is director. Oh, so she can do that. She can do that. I will be. Let me talk about that and I will be right back. That's not gonna change everything. Right there. And I'm gonna turn off those lights up front so they're not quite glaring.
So they give you scholarships, if you qualify, they can do your
It's the
admission.
sign up, which I will be.
I think it is every quarter if you pass the class, because I don't know as far as did they fill out an application? And they,
No,
emergency, yeah, the emergency, there was an emergency situation. I'm emailing Tanisha Williams,
oh, Tanisha, yeah,
yeah, and
that's why we work with Josh.
yeah, and Will Gershman, yeah, he's the
Okay.
VP.
Oh,
Tanisha handles that directly with
Okay.
students, because, you know, Josh, he could keep trying
yeah,
to bring
she
money.
did, I got it around.
They forget, they just send more out. But that's not it.
So, is that?
He said the sign-in was just for enrolled students.
Yeah, so for two, for
Okay,
enrolled.
sorry, sorry, thank you.
So I
Okay,
can find it,
so we'll hire you.
so.
Okay.
We got.
So let's see.
You.
State employee, that is what's happening on the senior.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah.
And worry about family patient.
But,
And papers that you may pay for. themselves.
yeah, for sure, the ones they pay for, but if your overall academic or
And so.
non-academic,
Cause I need the item number and I don't know.
they don't get to qualify that based on.
Do
academic.
you remember if you're
So
in,
that's why I have to Tanisha, she'll know all that.
so 191, 192,
Yeah, that's the series that I'm in, and they said to just keep adding a number, because I keep,
So-
keep recurring.
So have you already taken 190 and 191?
Oh, yes, this will be my fourth quarter, taking third one.
So we'll just call it 192 then.
That's what they said, that's what Professor Bear said.
That sounds perfect.
Oh, sorry.
Well, let me know if you want to start.
Okay, wait, let me turn off the lights in the front. and then we can go and get started. So for those of you who are enrolled in the course, we do have a sign-in sheet. So I might. Yeah, I think I'll just keep it at the edge, maybe in the back. So. You can. Make sure everybody. Okay. So I will be on Zoom in the chat, just kind of monitoring that for any questions. And
Okay, perfect.
I think we're good.
Okay, so I will go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming today. I had the option of Zoom or in person, and I'm burnt out on Zoom presentations. So I used it as an excuse to come up for a visit. And I thought I would talk a little bit about my background, a little bit about the background on electric vehicles, how we study them, why we study them, why we might care about them at all. And then kind of what's coming next for the market. So as just a quick introduction, I got my bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering from UC Davis. When I was a student, I started working on a student design team. We were working on converting a Suburban and a Ford Explorer to plug-in hybrid vehicles. And I will set a baseline for acronyms and what all of those things mean as we go. But our vehicle went from being, a Suburban that might get 12 miles per gallon to one that could get about 30 miles per gallon and had the ability to drive for about 40 miles using just electricity before that engine kind of kicked in. I got so invested in the topic that I stayed for an unintended master's degree, and then studied electric school buses for that. Ended up working at Southern California Edison at the utility down there, also studying vehicle electrification and actually forklift electrification while I was there. And jump in, raise your hand for those of you in person if you have any questions. Stop me while I'm going. And for those of you online, Lydia is monitoring, so go ahead and jump in as well. Raise your hand or unmute yourself, and I welcome your questions as we go. The center that I manage is the Electric Vehicle Research Center. We're quite specialized. We're part of a much broader Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis. We have folks that are focused on transit, on bike and pedestrian access, and like better city design so that people can use cars less. We have a group focused on what we call the 3 revolutions, which is that sharing like gig and Lyft or zip cars, the automation, which we hear about most kind of, I would say most obviously with Tesla and how people are using some of the Tesla autopilot systems, and then the electrification of transportation and how those all 3 are working together and sometimes not working together. And then we have folks that are focused on freight, focused on electrification, and focused on specific international audiences, right? We have a group that looks at China and that looks at India, and we have groups that are collaborations of lots of international partners trying to share information and research and learnings so that the folks who are doing amazing things with electric vehicle adoption in Norway can teach the rest of us who are a step behind, and those of us who are a step behind can teach those who are 2 or 3 steps behind. So we try to really kind of pull learnings from different sections. I'm going to start with the assumption that we know that climate change is happening, that there are greenhouse gases in our environment, and that they can cause real climate changes. This slide I just wanted to kind of put up because it's not that there were never greenhouse gases in our environment, it's that there are more greenhouse gases in our environment. And that is caused by many of the things that we have been doing as humans since the Industrial Revolution. And it leads not just to climate change, but it also leads to things like local air quality problems and health impacts. And I just covered my phone cues. Okay, so I'm from California. That's where UC Davis is, near Sacramento, near the capital. We have a lot of interactions with state agencies in our research, and I thought I would pull this. This is one that I usually share that just points out that transportation is 39–40% of California's greenhouse gas emissions. That's why we're targeting transportation. That's one of the things we're focused on. I thought as reference that I would then look at what's going on in Washington, and surprisingly, you guys are like almost exactly the same. It's 39% of the GHG emissions for the state of Washington as well. I pulled this from the Department of Ecology, and then I looked at some of the other steps that Washington in particular is taking. And one of those steps is actually adopting California's ZEV standard for vehicles starting in 2025. And I'll mention, I think I have it a little bit later, but they're actually giving credit for electric vehicles sold in the state of Washington as of 2023 and 2024. And the way that this is structured is that auto manufacturers have to sell a certain number of electric vehicles in the state as of 2025. But if they can earn credit as of 2023 or 24, guess where they're shipping their vehicles? They're coming to Washington as of 2023 or 24. And we've seen that have huge impacts in actually the adoption of EVs in the state. And the same thing is happening at any other state that has adopted California's ZEV requirements. And then they also adopted more stringent emission standards that would impact all vehicles, including gas vehicles. We at ITS talk about something called the 3-legged stool, which is greenhouse gas emissions, and is made up of a function of low carbon fuels, vehicle efficiency, and land use And what that means is really just how many miles people drive per year, right? So if you use a low carbon fuel, but you're driving more miles per year, your end result kind of washes out. So we're trying to research and target things that impact all of these factors. Electric vehicles don't really affect land use planning or reduction in greenhouse or reduction in vehicle miles traveled, but they do impact low carbon fuels. Electricity is a lower carbon fuel than gasoline. And it's also more localized, more easily controlled if you think about it coming from a dozen power plants rather than 15 million tailpipes, right? That's a lot easier to manage, monitor, manage, control. And then you have vehicle efficiency, and electric motors are by design more efficient in using the energy that you give them than a gasoline engine is. So a gasoline engine maxes out at about 30% efficiency. An electric motor maxes out at about 90% efficiency. So electric vehicles address two of the three legs in this three-legged stool. So they're also not a new, electric vehicles are not a new thing. The first electric car was actually built in 1837. Surprisingly, I can't really imagine how they did that in 1837, but they did. And then they had to, they had water-based batteries. They had to water their lead acid batteries and things. The next one came in 1859. By the turn of the century, we had steam engines, gas engines, and electric vehicles. And they sold electric vehicles as like nice cars for women because you didn't have to crank start them and they didn't go very far. You could run your little lady errands around town. So here's a couple of examples of old electric vehicles. Since then, they, obviously gasoline engines won that race. We had a few waves in the 90s where there was a little bit more interest and investment, and then they tapered off. And really what's made the difference in the market now is the battery manufacturing, right? We've changed our chemistries. We have much better batteries, and they're capable of storing much more energy in the same volume. So to level set a little bit, I like to use this spectrum where we go from internal combustion engines, which we know have like a very small battery to start the engine, 12-volt battery. And then you add a little bit bigger battery, you get something like a Prius, you get a hybrid vehicle, otherwise known as an HEV. This one increases your fuel economy, but doesn't actually operate as an electric vehicle for any amount of time. You don't have to plug it in. The only fuel you give it is still gasoline. Those are all, gasoline is the fuel that you give it. We shift over, we increase the battery a little bit more, and you get something called a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or a PHEV. And the Chevy Volt is a great example. They discontinued that vehicle. They're going to make a different plug-in hybrid again, but the RAV4 is available as a plug-in hybrid. The Toyota Prius is also a Prime, the plug-in hybrid. This has two fuels. You plug it into the wall. You can also put gasoline in it, and you get electric operation. When the battery runs out, you get gas operation, and that gas operation is quite efficient. It runs like a hybrid, so you're getting something on the order of 40 to 50 miles per gallon. One of the things I have seen auto manufacturers do is actually increase performance to where they're actually not getting as much of a fuel efficiency increase as they could, but they're getting a really high performing vehicle instead. So that depends on the strategy of the auto manufacturer, and that's how they're differentiating themselves. And then all the way to the right, we have a full battery electric vehicle. The only fuel going into this is electricity. The range started at about 100 miles in about 2010. That was the Nissan Leaf. And then are now, on average, new electric vehicles are getting about 250 miles of range for every kind of plug-in event. So a full charge is 250 miles of range. Usually they're recharged around most people are comfortable 10 or 20% is when they decide to plug it in. So as I said, the first vehicles that hit the market were in recent times were the Chevy Volt and the Nissan Leaf in 2010. There's now about 30 models of each plug-in hybrid and battery electric vehicles to choose from. They're on the market. And I will say that auto manufacturers are sending those vehicles to states that have requirements for sales of those vehicles. And so there's a very disparate adoption levels in different states around the country. And a lot of it is driven by the policies that are in place. And currently about 1 in 4, about 25% of new vehicles sold in California is a plug-in hybrid or a battery electric vehicle. It's one of these two technologies. We tend to lump them together as plug-in electric vehicles, which gets us here. There's a lot of acronyms in my world. And I walked us through the spectrum kind of from, and this is, I probably should reorient the slide so it matches the same spectrum. Hybrid, which is still just a gasoline engine, plug-in hybrid, which is gas and electricity, and full electric, which is a battery electric vehicle. And what I didn't introduce before was a FCEV, a fuel cell electric vehicle. I'm not going to talk about them a lot, but they do qualify as zero emission vehicles, which means zero tailpipe emissions. That's a policy acronym. It's not a technology acronym. And you can tell it's a policy acronym because plug-in hybrids definitely have tailpipe emissions. They have gasoline engines, but they still get like partial credit under zero emission vehicle regulations. So a lot of people thought of them as like the stepping stone to get to battery electric vehicles, as full electric vehicles, that people would kind of practice with electricity with a plug-in hybrid and then go be able to make the jump to a full electric vehicle. I think our understanding right now is that they're going to be the best possible solution for a lot of use cases. And in particular, things like towing, heavy trucks, rural areas, longer distance driving. There's a lot of kind of places where a plug-in hybrid is probably going to be the best we can do for the foreseeable future. Any questions on the array of acronyms?
On
Yeah.
the fuel cell,
Yeah,
on the fuel cell vehicles, but they don't have a battery.
they do have they do have a small battery. They're just not plugged in. And you don't charge the battery.
So they would need to be charged with solar power?
They're
or-
charged with hydrogen. Yeah, they're refueled with hydrogen. Yeah. And so they have large hydrogen tanks. They're hydrogen at high pressure. But it's a whole nother infrastructure rollout, right? If we think about the fact that we have electricity almost everywhere, right? It may not be electricity at the level we need to charge a vehicle, but we have electricity everywhere. We don't have hydrogen everywhere. We don't have great ways to make hydrogen. So there's a few extra hurdles for that. There are auto manufacturers who are working on that and have fuel cell vehicles that you can buy right now. That one is a Toyota Mirai. It's a beautiful car. I've driven one. I've refueled one, but it's there's just a few extra hurdles.
Are there additional safety hazards with fuel cells with pressurized hydrogen?
Likely,
Different than like a gasoline?
I mean,
gas station?
gasoline is also totally combustible. But yeah, no, probably there are some current concerns there with high pressure hydrogen. In terms of refueling, it's pretty safe. It's not just a gas station pump where you connect it. They actually like screw in and lock on while you're fueling. So they're trying to accommodate that. And the tanks and stuff they're designed for high pressure hydrogen. They're designed for impact. They're usually built within the structure of the vehicle so that they're sheltered from crashes and things like that. But that's the goal. Yeah.
So right now, if you didn't want one of those fuel cell
Uh-huh.
electric vehicles, I would assume those charging stations for them aren't gonna be available at this point
Mm.
in all 50 states.
They're not in all 50 states, yeah. They're gonna be rolling out in, I would say, like, kind of like clusters or networks. And the federal government is investing in the establishment of some of these refueling networks for hydrogen, and in particular as a way to solve some of the long distance freight challenges. Yeah. So there's a few states that have put in proposals for funding to build out, and in partnership with companies like that like Shell or something that are investing in hydrogen as their
So the
next.
rate that it's progressing, it looks like a reasonable bet for when they're gonna be relatively commonplace is what? Another 40 or 50 years from now at the rate it's progressing?
I would say 20. People that research fuel cells will say 10, but they've said 10 for the past 20 years. So I'm gonna go 20. I don't think it's 40 or 50 years out, but I don't think we're quite
We're
at,
not on the cusp yet.
yeah. And I think there's like 3 models that are available for sale. Whereas, we have auto manufacturers, something like 30 models of the other technologies that are available for sale. So they're a step behind.
Is this for like, are they doing this for like health reasons or something?
Yeah, I think,
So like the pollution in the air? for
Yeah.
pesticides and stuff
yeah,
like
I think
that?
local air quality and local health, and then also this kind of global emissions issue. There's a few motivations. And so as comparison, I mentioned, between beginning of 2023 and the end of 2023 in Washington state, there was a 43% increase, in, PEV. So this is the combined grouping of battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid. It's a plug-in electric vehicle. So any vehicle that plugs into the electric grid is a PEV. So this groups those together. This chart sort of separates them out, and you can see the big jump here is full electric vehicles, in large part because the Tesla Model 3 came out, which is a much more affordable vehicle. It's still qualified for a lot of the rebates. It was almost about 20% of Washington's new vehicle sales, which is impressive. That's actually higher than I was expecting. And so why did that go up? One is there's federal incentives that help with the purchase for individuals to purchase new electric vehicles. There's Washington state has an additional state incentive for the purchase. The other thing that happened was there's more and more options that are available, right? Each manufacturer is coming out with more and more models that are available for people to choose from. And so before, when you could only buy a sedan that was electric or a small car like the Chevy Bolt, now there's trucks, now there's SUVs, now there's big sedans, small sedans, crossover vehicles. Almost every brand has one. That competition has also led to price cuts. So we can take the price cuts from a company like Tesla in 2 different ways. A news article might present it as they have to cut prices to sell vehicles, and so that means that there's not a strong enough demand and the market's tanking, right? That's one way to interpret it. The alternate way to interpret it is there's a lot more models, so they can't charge anything they want because they have competition from other manufacturers. They're not the only game in town anymore. So there's a couple of different ways that you can interpret that competition, but the end result is price cuts for consumers because there is more options available. And then I mentioned this credit for ZEVs. Manufacturers can earn credits in the 2 years prior to them being required to earn credits. And so that's helping. They're bringing vehicles to the market. And we see that in places where there's a requirement for sales, the manufacturers are bringing cars to sell. When there's no requirement to sell zero emission vehicles, the auto manufacturers are just not sending cars to those states or in very, very small numbers. So people can't buy them if they're not available to sell. And the next slide, don't try to read the numbers really. Especially on, yeah, this one, don't read the numbers, just look at the trend there. The next slide, I thought I'd dive a little bit more into which states have that zero emission vehicle requirement. So this is the zero emission vehicle requirement. There's lots of other requirements that states can opt into. And this is the map showing them. I just pulled out Washington because it shows the low emissions requirements they adopted in 2009. The zero emission vehicle requirement Washington State adopted going into effect in 2025. And then there's heavy duty standards as well. So this came about because California's air quality was terrible and received an exemption called Section 172 that allows, or 177, that allows California to regulate at more stringent levels than the US standard. And the challenge for that was then the automakers went, we can't have every state having their own emissions standards. We can't make 50 different versions of cars. So the federal government said, okay, California has to regulate to at least as good as the federal requirement for emissions or better or stronger. Other states can either adopt the California stronger standard or the federal standard. And so there's about 13 states that have adopted California's more stringent standards, and they don't adopt all of them necessarily. Some of them, like Pennsylvania, doesn't have the zero emission vehicle standard, but does have the low emission standard for gasoline vehicles. Yeah, any questions on that? Okay. Yeah.
Suppose that I'm right there in about, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska. And I've got a vehicle that is exclusively hybrid. And I run out of charge. What are my chances of being able to find a charging station?
Yeah, so a hybrid vehicle has both gasoline and electricity, but if you had just a electric vehicle in those areas, there are networks that are built out. Tesla's is the most built out kind of charging network. And I don't have maps of the charging networks, but there are apps that you can look at that show you where the nearest charging on. There's even apps that tell you, like, from if I want to go from here to there, what vehicle you're driving, so it knows your range. You can put in what state of charge you start your trip with, and it tells you where to stop, at what charger, and for how long to stop, so that you know, like, how I charged 80% at this stop, charged to 90% at the next stop, charged to 60% at your last stop, and you'll get to your destination.
You'd have to do a lot more pre-planning.
A little bit more
Not
pre-planning,
just,
yeah,
road
yeah.
trips where you get in the car and off you go and all is good, there'll be a gas station around the corner.
Right, yeah. Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot more investment going in to build that out right now. But it does take a little bit of planning. The alternative, the kind of other side of the coin is that you can charge most people, if they have a garage, you can plug in at home. A lot of apartments are installing chargers. So you don't have to go to a gas station because nobody really loves hanging out at gas stations either. So the, pros and cons, but yeah, there is a little bit more planning that's involved. So I thought I'd mention this because I did mention that electricity is cleaner than gasoline. This was a study from quite a few years ago, but Washington shows up beautifully on here with an average for an electric vehicle of 94 miles per gallon equivalent. So if you were to charge an electric vehicle using the mixture of sources on the electric grid here in Washington, it's the equivalent to driving a vehicle that gets 94 miles per gallon in terms of how much emissions go in to the air from generating the electricity to fuel that vehicle. California is not as good. You guys have a ton of hydropower up here, which is why your grid is the cleanest grid in the nation, I think. Other areas have more coal dependent grids. And those are the dirtier ones where if you drive a sedan that gets 30 miles per gallon and you switch to a sedan that's electric, you're not benefiting a whole lot right now. As I mentioned, there's more opportunity for improvement and requirements for the grid to get better, whereas gasoline engines have a tendency to get worse. They never get better as they age.
Is that where the standards come into play? Some have higher, some have lower. Will that affect how they sell vehicles or? You get one?
Yeah, so in terms of, yeah, the emission standards do kind of have requirements for what comes out of the tailpipe for gasoline vehicles, yeah. And then there's different requirements that control what type of electricity generation is used in each state or in each kind of group of states for these.
Will that affect their ability to sell cars to people by standard? You say some?
Yes. So a lot of the auto manufacturers have to put, I mean, the solution that we've seen them do so far, for example, with a gasoline vehicle, they put a better catalytic converter on the tailpipe of a car that goes to California than they do on a car that goes to Missouri. So California gets the same vehicle, except a better, more expensive catalytic converter that makes the emissions cleaner on the tailpipe. So they don't really change what vehicles are available. They do change the kind of finishing touches on the vehicles. And then with the requirement to sell electric vehicles, what we're seeing is that they'll actually sell those electric vehicles in the states that have requirements for sales.
Is that why the catalytic converters, I mean, there's a high risk for people still in it?
Yeah, it's because catalytic converters have precious metals in them, and those precious metals can be melted down. Yeah.
Platinum, for example. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They advance that, they can make a tiny little profit.
Yeah.
Oh.
So they're trying to actually track catalytic converters and have a waiting period before you can actually get money for a catalytic converter, because obviously that's a major
There's a
issue.
huge black market in it. There was a 600, about 3 years ago, there was a 600% increase in Bellevue in catalytic converters. That was in 1 year.
Yeah. The nice thing is that EVs don't have catalytic converters, so they can't steal it. Yeah. Yeah.
Is the disparity in Alaska just based on where population is? Power generation is needed?
I am not sure. It is based on what grid like how they're connected to the grid. And so we have these interconnects in the US, right? So California has a mix of sources that can come in, but we're connected to a broader grid. Other states don't have the same mix, and so they're pulling electricity from neighboring states. My guess is Alaska may be pulling part of theirs in from Canada based on where they are. They may have, they might just be limited by what they can
I think
import.
the grid is marginal, because Canada would want to share that grid. If it's trying to implement something like this, it's going to need that grid for itself. It's only got 5 major rivers in that part of the country. None of them compare to Columbia.
Yeah,
It's going to need that grid for itself.
but yeah.
Oh, what about outside of the US? Is there like a bigger option outside the US for more,
Vehicles, like more electric vehicles. Yeah, it's very regional. Norway is the world leader in percent of new vehicles sold. They're over 80% of their new vehicles sold every year are electric. China is the world leader in terms of number of electric vehicles sold. They have a huge car market. They sell a lot, and China has a very different political scene where they can just demand that they sell electric vehicles, and so electric vehicles are sold.
Whether or not you can charge them, that doesn't matter.
Right. So yeah, it is very regional dependent. Europe is a little bit ahead of us in the US. And they have kind of European Union wide requirements for EV sales and are coordinating rollout of infrastructure to support EVs and everything.
Is that how, other areas are saying that we are very much trying to deal with global warming?
Yeah, they have, and some of them have, phase outs that like no gasoline vehicles can be sold as new vehicles as of 2035. So they're a little bit faster of a roll up than we are.
So would that be like supply and demand or e-commerce, if you wanted to get something from one of these cars from China or Norway into America, how would they do that?
Yeah,
And
we
it's
don't
based
have any
on-
Chinese vehicles that come into the US right now. There are Chinese companies that are trying to get their vehicles certified for sale in the US. And they would bring it over like everything else. They bring them up on big shipping,
There's a limit
boats,
for each
yeah.
state or countries or whatever, like you can't only.
Automakers decide how they distribute their vehicles.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh.
yeah.
And there's a big difference in Chinese QA than ours, their quality assurance. Huge difference. Our standards are much higher. Their quality assurance standards are marginal.
We have a little bit different. The EU also has very different standards, actually. They take into account, for example, pedestrian safety in crash testing, whereas we don't take that into account in our crash safety testing is just based on who's in the vehicle, not how the vehicle might impact people outside of the vehicle. So a vehicle like the Cybertruck is going to have a much harder time passing safety, not because it's unsafe for the inhabitants of the vehicle, but because it's unsafe for the people that might be hit in an accident on their bikes or cars or other cars. So I'm gonna, what's my time? Okay. Like 10 minutes or so, 15-ish?
Yeah.
Okay.
20.
Yeah, well, okay. I'll try not to take that whole time. So this is our EV Research Center. Our focus is consumers. That is the center of everything we do, both people who have already purchased an electric vehicle and people who have not yet purchased an electric vehicle. We do that through surveys, interviews, focus groups. We try to understand what motivated purchases or what motivated the purchase of a new vehicle that was not electric. We try to understand what influenced their choice, what policies impacted them. Yeah.
Question when it comes to charging the cars.
Uh-huh.
I've never been in one and I don't know how it works. Can you pay for the charge? Is it free? Okay.
Yeah. Usually you pay for the charge. There are cases where it's free. A lot of workplaces have them and they offer it for free to employees as kind of a perk.
Does it also get inflated like gas prices inflated as well?
It's not as doesn't fluctuate as much. It's not as susceptible to changes. Some of them, especially at fast charging locations, which are supposed to charge in 10 minutes. It's the idea is that it's similar to the speed of charging a gasoline vehicle. Some of them have time of use based fees. And so if you charge in the peak of grid demand, you're going to pay a higher rate for that electricity.
What about airbags and safety basis on men and women?
I don't know if the auto manufacturers are doing gender-based testing for their airbags.
I was saying
That's a
something
great
like how-
question.
I was looking at something and they were saying something about how, women, we may sit more closer or
Mhm,
stuff like
yeah.
that, or the airbags. So I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, yeah. No, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot that we do based on studies of the average man, and there's actually no average man, let alone a woman that looks like the average man. And we tend to leave women out of science. So that's the area that the auto manufacturers have to do the airbag research.
Like the crash test.
Crash
dummies
testing and
on all
stuff.
these cars.
They do all the crash testing and safety stuff the same for EVs as they do for gas vehicles, yeah. But I don't know how they do it or if they differentiate by gender in crash tests. Sorry. Yeah.
You know, we're an instant society. We want everything instantly, including gassing up our cars. We want it now and off we go. A car that's electric, any idea what the typical recharging time frame might be?
That depends on the type of charging that you do. I thought I had a slide on that earlier in my slide deck and I didn't see it. So there is level 1, which is literally that outlet. And you can plug in your car to that outlet. It will charge a full electric vehicle in about a day-ish. So you don't want to use that. That's not ideal. A level 2 requires a charger, like what we call an electric vehicle supply equipment, an EVSE. And those can be installed similar to a dryer, an electric dryer. It's 240 volt, usually in your garage or outside next to your house. Those will recharge an electric vehicle overnight, something like 6 to 8 hours. And then the DC fast charging, kind of empty to all the way full, you can do in about 20 to 30 minutes. And that's
Pre-planning. You don't just stop at the gas station, put the gas in and zoom, off you go.
right. That's use the bathroom, grab a snack while your car charges sort of break. Yeah.
They're different in price, so it'd be.
Yeah. Yeah.
As much, I mean.
Yeah.
like-
If you can charge at home, it's the cheapest. If you have to pay to charge in public, it's a little bit more expensive. If you have to pay to use DC fast charger, that's the most expensive option.
And versus.
DC fast charging in public is about on par with gas prices on like a per mile cost. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Does the strength of the charging affect how it continues to charge over time? Like how if you use like a fast charger on your phone and like you're using your phone while it's being charged, the battery's gonna start using up more of the power, and they think like, oh, we need more power. Type of way. Does the cars get affected by that?
No, not like a phone would. The one impact it could have is that if you're charging to 100% and discharging your vehicle to 0%, as in you're using your full battery on a very regular basis, that can be detrimental for your battery. So the recommendation from auto manufacturers is to operate in the 20% to 80% range. And for most people, daily driving, that is more than enough, right? Yeah. The average miles driven in the US on a per day basis is something like 40 miles a day. And so if you think about using 60% of a vehicle that has 250 miles of range, that's more than enough to do daily driving. And then what you would do is if you need to do the longer trips, that's where you go 100 to 10.
Yeah.
Don't go below 10, please. I don't want to be blamed for stranded drivers.
If you make a mistake, can you blow the engine or something?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to put oil in these cars. You don't have to, change the spark plugs in these cars. You really actually very rarely have to do anything with the brakes because it uses the electric motor to do regenerative braking. So you have much less wear and tear. There's a lot less maintenance on these vehicles than on gasoline vehicles. And especially with the pure electric vehicles, it's a very simple powertrain. Most of them don't even have a transmission, so to speak. So yes, there are some fluids. There are. Yeah. So there is less maintenance. There is coolant around the electric motor and around the electronics on the vehicle, but that's coolant. Sorry. Yeah, no Cool Whip, no Cool Whip. Do not put Cool Whip in your inverter, please. Yeah, but so those are also sealed systems. They're closed systems. So they're like something that you would check level on every 60,000 miles
Oh.
or something, not every 5,000 miles.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just as the hydrogen reservoir would be a cool insulated sealed system, right? The
Um,
hydrogen reservoir.
The hydrogen for like a fuel cell, it's not a sealed system in the same way. There is cooling around it, but no, it's like an in and out system. Yeah. So anyway, I think you guys stared at this enough. We do a lot of work, but it centers on the consumers. And we gather a lot of data in a lot of different ways. And this is approximately the adoption trajectory that we expect to see coming for the US. And we see a pretty steep ramp up. And in particular, we see increasing adoption of EVs in households that are going to buy more than one new car. There's most new cars go to the same few households in the US. Most Americans buy used cars. That's like the biggest part of the puzzle there. And then there's a few people that buy a lot of new cars and some people that don't buy cars at all. But the households that buy EVs are going back to buy their second and their third EVs. Some of them keep 2 or 3 EVs in the household and become exclusively EV households. Some of them cycle those out to the used car market, which is great. It makes it more affordable for me when I bought my used plug-in hybrid. But we're seeing this increase, not necessarily a huge increase in people who live in apartments who can buy electric vehicles yet, but in households that buy EVs and then come back for more, basically. And an increase, of course, in used EVs as those households cycle out to the used market. We're also seeing then what that means is that access to home charging is decreasing as we're progressing in the market, because the people who are early to the market are the people who live in single family homes. They might not live in apartments. They might be in places that have better electrical infrastructure, more urban, suburban, and less the rural areas have potentially less access to the kind of needs for electricity.
So is the goal over time to just focus on these kind of cars in the future, just have electric vehicles and no exhaust or anything? Is that the goal?
That's
over-
the goal. Yeah, that's the US goal. Yep.
Are they
Yeah.
working on for like bigger transportations like buses and stuff like that? Are they ever working,
Yeah, absolutely. School buses are electrifying. The great part about school buses is that they have very fixed routes. We know exactly where they go. They that was my master's thesis. They're a great application because they usually go out once in the morning, they do their loop, they come back to a home base, they can charge in the middle of the day, they go back out, they do a fixed route in the afternoon, they can come back and charge overnight. They're actually the perfect use case despite their size.
Like Metro buses, they're trying to do that now.
Metro buses are electrifying as well. Yeah. Metro buses are a tougher use case because they run from like 7 in the morning until 10 or midnight, right? So that's a harder use case. They need a bigger battery or they need to have quick charging en route.
and backup battery that they're able to switch to?
Right.
from
Yeah.
that, and then
Yeah.
be able to use that, like,
Battery swapping is what China is doing for buses. Not what the US is going with right now. What I've seen so far is fast charging at the like transit hubs where a lot of buses can use. They come in, they charge for 10 minutes while they're loading and unloading passengers before the next loop starts. And then they are able to charge like kind of once every hour or two at the home base, essentially.
Are they doing inductive charging with that?
Some are
Or is it
inductive.
plug-in charging?
Most are conductive, yeah, and they're coming down actually from the top. You can do them 4 different ways, but yes.
The bus, like your QI charger, it just covers over it and.
Yeah,
I thought they were trying to build
we
that into some bus station.
They are, and I saw it in Europe. They do inductive charging where there's no physical connection. The bus just can come in and hover. essentially. And as long as it's parked over the inductive charging pad, it can charge. There's also plugs that are the same as what we would use for cars for DC fast charging. They can also use the same plug to DC fast charge a bus. And then they have like overhead lines that can come in and kind of plop in and charge from above for the transit.
But for example, the heavy equipment used in, say, freeway construction, they use the inductive charging. Wouldn't they?
I don't think so. I think they would probably do plug-in charging. But that's a brand new field with not a lot of options right now. Yeah. And who knows, there's probably different applications where different solutions make sense. Inductive is a little bit less efficient. You lose energy when you're inductively charging. So my guess is they would do conductive. This is our forecast. And if we popped back to the map that I showed of the states that adopted California's emissions regulations, you can see that the states that have ZEV requirements are the states that will have the high adoption of zero emission vehicles. And this is because the automakers don't just come in with 100 vehicles and give 2 to each state. If they come in with 100 EVs, but they have to sell 4 of them in California, California gets 4. And so, you know, this is how they're distributing. And we see this kind of huge discrepancy, right, between California and some of the other states that are 60 or 70% of, you know, the new vehicle market are EVs, and a place like Texas that doesn't have a zero emission vehicle requirement, that new vehicle sales are going to be in 2032. Our forecast is about the same as where you guys are right now, 20%. So then the question is, are consumers kind of keeping up with where auto manufacturers are going and where the policies and regulations from our government are pushing us? And so between 2019 and 2021, we had 190% increase in the number of EV models available for consumers to choose from. We asked in our survey, can you name an electric vehicle? And actually had more than half that could not name a plug-in vehicle, either a hybrid or a full electric vehicle. And the challenging part is, despite the increase in the number of vehicles, there was basically no increase. There's no statistically significant increase between these two columns. There's no change in what consumers saw in the market, despite the fact that auto manufacturers have produced so many more options. Really quick, there was a 900% increase in EV chargers between 2014 and 2021. As I said, we are investing in infrastructure to support travel, right? We're not just selling the cars with no chargers. Did people notice any of those chargers? And this was a multi-state survey: California, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, and Oregon. And did people, the question on the survey, I think, was, have you ever seen an EV charger? And unfortunately, that number didn't get much better either. The no or not sure is still pretty high. Right? And this is a 7-year span, 2014 to 2021, 900% increase in chargers, and what, maybe like a 15 or 20% decrease in people that have seen them. So a 400% increase in EV sales from, again, the 7-year period, 14 to 21. We asked about whether people would consider purchasing an electric vehicle. In this case, this question is for battery electric. We asked the same question about plug-in hybrids. And the options here are, I haven't and I would not consider a BEV or PHEV. Adamantly against the idea. Haven't, but maybe someday. The idea has occurred to me, but I haven't taken any steps or done any research. The light blue is, I've gathered some information about them, but not serious yet. And that green at the top and the darker blue, I've actively shopped for a BEV, and the very green is I have or have already owned in the past a battery electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid. And again, a 7-year span and not a big difference. So this is where we see that those cars, those EVs are going to the same households that are repeat buyers, right? That's where we're getting that information from. And unfortunately, the percent of the population that are kind of doing the work and investigating the idea is not really keeping up with the need for expansion of the market, right? So we at our research center obviously feel like there needs to be more done on the part of the automakers, on the part of even the policymakers. If you're going to require sales of EVs, you have to be able to have people know what they're getting into, understand the pros and cons, be able to have a smooth process in installing a charger at their home, if that's what they need to do. And so how our EV research kind of helps to impact the growth of the market, we hope, that our research is impactful. We continue to study the market, as I said, through consumers, but also following what's happening internationally. We do a lot of work on the electrical grid, which I haven't really touched on at all today, but I have a research colleague whose focus is on looking at what's happening in the generation space and how do we meet the new added demand in electricity from electric vehicles. What are the emissions impacts associated with those, right? Because it does matter based on when and where you charge your vehicle. We have some work that does modeling on where charging is needed based on where people travel and what time it's needed and where we can spot sort of congestion coming, like Fridays before Labor Day weekend. That's going to be a hard time to charge your vehicle. Don't, like there's always congestion at the Costco. We might have situations similar to that at peak times with chargers. So making sure that the system is reliable and that there's options so that people have different places that they can go to charge to create a reliable infrastructure system. We're looking at how EVs integrate with automation technologies like the self-driving. We're looking at how electrification can impact lower income and disadvantaged communities, those folks who have been left behind by other transportation policies. How can we make sure that they're not left behind with this transition? And so we are actively engaged with those communities, with community-based organizations to make sure that we understand their needs and their concerns and create like incentives or policies that target those needs and those concerns rather than just assuming that researchers or policymakers know what they need. We don't. And then consumer energy interface is a little kind of a side project, but we have researchers that are looking at how the information on display in a vehicle helps the consumer understand how efficiently they're driving, where to charge, or the impacts of their charging. Think I'm going to skip this. This was a tool that we've developed that if you want to look up UC Davis EV Explorer, it's able to generate, it creates a random sample of 4 vehicles, at least one of which is an electric vehicle. You put in your start and your end location for your daily commute, for example, and it kind of tells you what your annual operating costs in terms of fuel costs. And you can see like this is a Honda Civic, for example. This is an extreme commute. Don't recommend San Francisco to Sacramento. It's like 2+ hours each way. Don't do it. But in a Honda Civic, this is all gas in yellow. In a BMW i8, love it, definitely, but very expensive vehicle. A little bit of EV driving range, but mostly that's a gas car. It's a hybrid. And then if you did a Chevy Volt, this is an older sample, and it had a Mitsubishi i-MiEV, which had something like an 80-mile range. So it was like, don't drive that in this IMEV. But it does an annual operating cost for your commute, and it's focused on commuting and annual costs. It lets you go in and add whether or not you have workplace charging, how much you pay for electricity, whether you have home electricity or you charge in public. It lets you kind of personalize this, and it's kind of a fun tool to play with if you're considering adopting a different vehicle. And I think I'm gonna skip this. I also advise a student project. For students, I recommend getting involved in student projects, and it's a great way to get experience. And I'm gonna skip that and just end there. So I think I talked enough. And any questions?
You got your car?
No, no. I only take pictures next to the pretty ones I get to test. I don't take pictures next to my Bolt. That's a Karma Rivero that came to visit. It's a fun car. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you for those online.
Yeah, are there any questions on Zoom? If you'd like, you could unmute yourself and ask a question. We should be able to hear you, hopefully.
I don't see any raised hands. I answered
About the
everybody's,
mileage
every
between-
question.
The mileage between electric and gas, is there a difference in, would you get better mileage, versus?
In terms of the range of your vehicle, like if you go refuel your gasoline car, most gasoline cars are 300 to 350 miles per refuel. And they basically change the size of the gas tank to match the efficiency of the vehicle so that they all get 300 plus miles per refueling. Electric vehicles can go that high. Most of them are about 240, 250 miles per recharge. Yeah.
So on the all electric vehicles, they have an air intake system, so where like if you're driving and there's smoke in the air or if there's ash, will it take that in, or can you breathe in the cab?
So they do have cabin air intake. They don't have the same sort of system that a gas engine was, right? They don't need to breathe like a gas engine does. They don't need that kind of air. But they do have, I think they do bring in fresh air for the cabin, and they have the same sort of option where you can recirculate or bring in fresh air.
But it's not, the motor's not required to breathe like a cab.
No, and if you notice, like a lot of them, and the Teslas are a great example, and the Mach-E, if you've ever seen a Mach-E, they have a very smooth front end, and they do that because it's more aerodynamic, but also because they don't need, they don't have a radiator to cool an engine, because the motors don't get hot the way engines get hot.
If you get stuck in a wildfire zone, you can fill the cabin. If you have breathing, you can drive that through the zone.
Yeah. And
There's a comment in the chat.
oh, here, I was gonna see if I had a picture of those are funny little cars. Okay. What was the comment in the chat?
It's from Sharon. She says she has a current recall on her electric hybrid that is currently unfixable and a big problem. Sharon, do you want to share what vehicle type or what the recall is?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, faintly, speak up.
You might
but
change the dial. I
Oh,
think
okay.
the dial knob, that might take the volume a little bit.
I've been told in the last Zoom that I have a bad microphone problem, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, super. Yeah, real quick, I bought a year ago this month and I've had a Toyota Prius hybrid in the past and had a great experience with it, so I'm not anti or anything, but this is a Ford Fusion electric, it's energy and hybrid. And 3 months into having it, so about 9 months ago, I received a notice from Ford that there is a recall on it. And I made an appointment with my dealership, blah, blah, blah. It was way backed up. And when it came down to the appointment time, they said, cancel the appointment. We still have no fix for this. And it literally is a danger problem. Like you're not supposed to, the advice on the letter said, don't put it in your garage. It could catch on fire. If you're in an accident, it could explode and catch on fire. all these things that could happen that are safety issues. Some of the vehicles, a rare number of them are actually stopping while they're moving on a freeway, which is a problem. And
Yeah,
a bunch of lists like that, and I've had just a horrible time getting them to really do anything. They gave me a $250 check for gas. And obviously I'm spending a ton of money on gas, not expected, and I paid more money for this vehicle to save money on gas. So it's a big dilemma, and I went to refinance the vehicle also to a lower interest rate because they've gone down slightly. And I found out that the car is worth like 40% less than it was when I bought it because of the recall
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
coming up.
Especially
with car
if they don't
tax.
have a fix out, yeah.
So now I have a car that's worth way less, and I'm losing all this money. My parking spot in my condominium village is double if you're at a charging spot, and I am. That's my assigned spot, is the charging spot. So I'm paying this extra money for a charging spot that I can't use. Anyway,
Yeah.
so it's a really big problem, and
Yeah, that would be hugely disappointing.
yeah. So there's still a lot of bugs to be worked out. in
Yeah.
this.
There are some bugs, and certainly some manufacturers are kind of doing a better job of rolling them out than others.
Yeah, the Prius, like I said, was fantastic hybrid experience.
Yeah, my Prius was great. Yeah. All right, yeah.
I just have a question.
Uh-huh.
So for the electric cars, are they also four-wheel drive cars?
There are all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, yeah, options.
Like, I didn't know like what, their capabilities going in snow are, because my car, I was Dodge Dart, and that thing can't go through snow very well at all, so
Yeah.
I'm just curious about their.
Yeah, it depends on the vehicle. I kind of lurk in a lot of the kind of chat groups around some of the vehicles, and some people say that they're great in snow, and especially if you have the right tires on them, they make a big difference. They are heavy, which is good for traction in some cases, not if you're stuck in a snowbank, but if you're on a road. And yeah, I've heard really good things about like the Mustang Mach-E and the Rivians and things like that. So there are options. Yeah.
What about stakes and automatic, stakes and automatic?
They're all
Yeah,
automatic.
They're all automatic?
They're all automatic. There's no stick shift on an EV. Yeah.
They're all automatic? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
My family has a Tesla, and
Okay.
we went on a road trip down to Reno.
Okay.
And for me, it was worth the time it took to go charge, for the saving money and the sustainability in that. But I know that we live in a fast-paced world where everybody just wants to like get things done and move on.
Yeah.
Is there any work towards faster charges?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some right now, like, so the first DC fast charging that went in at like 80 kilowatt hour rate. The ones that went in the next stage went in at 150. The ones going in right now are going at 350 kilowatts. So getting faster and faster. And that's great because the batteries are also getting bigger, which means you have to put more kilowatt hours into the battery. So the faster you can do that, you can keep the time frame about the same. Some of the auto manufacturers are upping the voltage on the batteries. So they've recently like doubled the battery voltage so that they can charge at faster and faster rates. Some car companies, you mentioned Porsche, is trying to go to like 650 kilowatt charging rates. So it will keep building. Everybody's end goal is that it kind of reaches the same level as gasoline refueling. Right now it's like take a break, use the restroom.
And failing that charging is the battery swap solution, where is it acceptable in the vehicle to really just plug in a new battery right away, just get it off the shelf and go?
No, battery swapping is a more intensive effort. And that's why I think we're only seeing it in certain places and certain applications. Like China is doing that for buses. There was a company 15 years ago that was exploring it for vehicles, but the challenge is that then you need basically 2 batteries per vehicle that you sell, so that there's one charged battery ready for you at all the stations that you might stop at, ready to go into your vehicle charged. So it's a really expensive proposition in terms of like infrastructure, in terms of battery resources. We didn't dive into it, but the materials that go into the batteries is a whole nother topic. And so if you can reduce the amount of batteries that you need and instead charge those batteries faster, that's a much more effective solution. Cool. Well, thank you all for your attention. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate your input. Sharon's still there. I apologize for your bad experience. I didn't do it, but it sounds miserable.
I understand.
And then I put up some resources, and EV Explorer isn't on there, but if you do, oh, it is, UC Davis's EV Explorer tool, if you wanted to play with that. Some of these are resources for finding chargers, for shopping and comparing different vehicle models. And then I found out that that Washington State has exemptions and incentives, and actually some of the public utilities have charging programs that incentivize the charger that you could install at your home.
Can you leave that up?
Yeah. And I think I sent this to you in an email, Lydia. You can share it if you want to.
The PowerPoint?
No, this list of resources
Oh.
in November, but I can resend it.
Yeah, I can post that to our, the information. On the Canvas page for sure. I might be able to add that to our. Yeah, I can for sure add it in Canvas. I'm not 100% certain how I would add it to the Highline College web page. I could figure that out though.
Well, I mean, I didn't use any special Google skills to find this information, so. Yeah.
And for the DC full charge
Yeah.
level, what voltage is that for the charge, like the fast rapid charge, like 20-30 minutes?
I know the kilowatt rate, but the voltage is really dependent on the battery in the vehicle. So on the order of 400 volts.
And that would be for consumer purchase.
Yeah, no, DC fast chargers are just in like public multi-use applications. There's no way that makes sense financially for private use. Yeah. Yeah, it's 400, 480 volt, right? So at home you can do level 2. That's the 240 volt like you would use for your oven or dryer or whatever. But DC fast is much faster, and it requires totally different utility connections.
And before the session, we were talking about generator, like solar panel generators.
Mhm.
We would get the voltage probably no higher than a level 2. Maybe the generator that you need to figure out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the solar is, like I said, you need a lot of surface area to make a lot of energy with solar. It's spatially not very efficient. So with something compact enough to put on or in a vehicle, you're going to be creating pretty low amount of energy. Yeah, not high power. Cool. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and check in on Zoom and see if there's anybody here who, and also in class, in this room, if anybody here is a registered student.
Thank you,
make sure
Pam.
that
Thanks
you
for coming.
Signed in on the sign-in sheet, make sure that I know that you are here, that your name is documented somewhere, so you get credit for attendance. Because this class is graded based off of attendance. And I'm actually gonna do a screen share real quick. Who's in the class? We got 1, 2, 3 people who are in the class. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick screen share for you guys. You know what? We'll see.
Oh, I didn't stop my presentation. I stopped sharing, but I didn't stop the presentation.
Anybody on Zoom in the class? Not actually 100%. Of course, that was me. That's why we have MagSafe chargers. We're good. We're good.
You're not gonna be able to do that next week.
No, I know. Don't judge me. Okay, let me see if I can get into Canvas. I posted some. It's probably gonna make me do two-factor authentication, in which case it won't let me do it. Yeah, okay, because I don't have Signal down here. So if you log into Canvas, there will be a section in Canvas that has the like topic. It will have a page, it will have the link to the Zoom stuff, and then below that is our discussion. So that's the assignment that you complete after the fact. It's a 3, 2, 1, like 3 things you learned, 2 things that, you know, whatever, 1 thing that you still have questions about. And I don't remember what I said in the syllabus about the deadline, but I'm gonna extend it to Sunday. I do recommend you do the discussion sooner than later, so you remember the things that you just learned. So if you did it like tonight, it would be more fresh in your memory. If you wait until Sunday night, then maybe you forget a little bit about the talk. So totally normal, those things happen. So do try to work on that, and that's sort of like the other half of the grade. So showing up is half, and then doing the thing is the other half.
So you say your post is 8 points and then you reply to 2 other people in the class for 2 points.
Yep.
It's supposed to be due tomorrow, but you're giving us till Sunday?
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna change it for the rest of the quarter and make it due on Sunday.
Okay.
I think I had originally planned to have it due Saturday, but then I was like, you know what, just give you an extra day to work on it over the weekend.
Did you want us to, do responses in the introduction too?
Sure. I don't remember if the rubric has responses as part of it.
I responded.
But you know what?
I wasn't sure.
It's a small class, so yeah, let's get to know each other. Let's do those, you know, responses so that, you know, we can learn a little bit about each other. And yeah, so that's basically the format for the whole class, is just show up, attend the seminar, ask questions, and then discuss it with some of your classmates after the fact. Cool.
Cool.
I think that's it. You guys are free to go. Thank you so much for
Thank
showing up.
you.
And like I said, if you are here for credit, please make sure you sign in.
I couldn't get a picture for my introduction, is that all right?
Oh, yeah, that's okay. You can use an avatar, I
When
think.
when I was responding, my profile picture shows on my responses, is that okay?
Yes.
I couldn't get